WU Vienna is the largest and only business and economics university in the country and one of the largest in Europe. My name is Bernadette Kamm-Leitner. I'm Vice Rector for Research and Third Mission here at Vienna, and I'm very happy to welcome you all on behalf of the entire Rectorate. Today's event is part of the WU Matters series, and it presents a very significant part of what we at WU are doing here. Our goal is to conduct internationally outstanding research and teaching, while not forgetting that we are essentially a state-funded university. There's a good reason that the term third mission is part of my job title. While this event is very much at the heart of what WU does in terms of research, it's also simultaneously at the heart of what we call our third mission, providing a platform for debate, encouraging interaction between researchers and the wider public, facilitating outreach, and translating complex and controversial issues to a broader audience. Today's topic, the Stability and Growth Pact, and EU financial policy certainly is such a very complex and for many also abstract issue. However, it's evident that financial policy decisions have a tremendous impact on all of us, on all Europeans and beyond. I, for one, am very much looking forward to being wiser about these issues at the end of tonight, and to learning from people that are internationally recognized for their expertise in the area. But before handing over to those experts, let me say something that often comes last, but essentially could come at the very beginning, and that's thank you. Thank you to all those who made this event possible, to Professor Felbermayr and his team for bringing this highly timely and important topic to the WU Matters series, and for arranging a very impressive set of experts. Which brings me to the person who's not yet here because she gave a talk in Brussels this very morning, which makes it rather hard to be here in Vienna in the evening. She nonetheless went through all of the troubles to come here. And there was also effort involved for all other panelists today who did devote their time and are happy to devote their expertise to a public debate on a very crucial matter tonight. Thank you. Thank you also to those that you can't see, but are very crucial behind the scenes, the colleagues from event management. Your relentless efforts make a smooth event like this possible. And finally, thank you to all of you for your patience and for coming here and making sure that a public event really fulfills its purpose. It's going to be through you, through your thoughtful attendance and through the sparks that you derive from today, that we can actually fulfill our purpose of translating expertise to a broader audience. I'm delighted to welcome you all. I wish you an inspiring evening and hand over to the more than competent moderator of tonight, Professor Felbermayr. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Rector. Thank you for your hospitality here at our university. I have the pleasure to be professor here, but only part-time because at least 4 days out of 5 in a week I'm at the Austrian Institute for Economic Research, WIFO. But it's fantastic that we have this joint series of WU Matters, WU Talks conferences together. We must talk about Europe. No? We must talk about Europe. There's urgency. Why? Because elections are upon us, no? Very soon. And you hopefully all go and cast your votes. But we must talk about Europe as well because for a small open economy like the Austrian, in the middle of Europe, Europe is of utmost importance for our well-being, for our security, for the stability of our economic system. And so it is a long-standing tradition at the Austrian Institute for Economic Research to support the European integration process. When Austria was about to enter the European Union, WIFO was crucial in providing the data work, the analysis, and also communicating about it, make people understand what the European Union can do for us. And we are now again, I think, in the critical bifurcation that there's a lot of skepticism about Europe. If you look at polls, then it's quite frightening. And if I look at my data and my analyses and I see to what extent the European integration delivers welfare for us in Austria and for many others, then I'm a bit scared. Because the perception out there and the evidence in the data diverge in the most ridiculous way that one can think of. And so I think it's good that we have this discussion here today. We'll talk about EU finances. And there are two reasons why we talk about EU finances. One reason is that the EU is just about applying new rules to the fiscal system. You all know the famous Maastricht rules that were decided before the euro was introduced, the 3% deficit cap and the 60% debt ceiling. And we know that these rules, were adjusted over time through the Stability and Growth Pact, and Diese will talk at length about it. But we also know one thing that is quite unfortunate, namely that out of the 25 years or so that we have the euro, and out of the 19, now even 20 with Croatia, euro members in the euro, we have many instances where the Maastricht rules were not achieved. And out of the, if you look at the big economies, France, Spain, Italy, Germany, in 54 of all years where these countries were in the Eurozone, the 3% ceiling was not achieved. So we have a problem with rules because they are not respected. But we need those rules. We need those rules in a currency union because if each member can run up as much deficit as the member likes, this will create inflationary pressures that will have implications for the monetary policy of the common central bank. So if Germany decides to be very inflationist because of a very expansionary fiscal stance, this will drive up at the end interest rates in Austria. So we have classical externalities, and we need those rules to internalize those externalities. But the big debate is how to do that. And today, I hope, we'll bring some insights into this big question. We're glad that you made it, Cinzia. It's great. Not your fault. I hope you didn't fly Austrian. Or did you? Okay, so joint responsibility is always dangerous in economics. We want clear responsibility so that we can blame one actor. Now it's, let's say, Lufthansa Group didn't deliver you at time, but it's good to have you here. Cinzia Arcidi comes from Brussels today. She works in Brussels at the Center of Economic Policy Studies, European Policy Studies in Brussels, CEPS. CEPS is one of these very important and influential think tanks. She is a senior research fellow there. She's head of the Economic Policy and Jobs and Skills Unit. You need to explain what this Jobs and Skills Unit is, I think, before you start your speech. She has been head of, or a director of research at CEPS. Cinzia has an impressive academic background. She got a PhD in international economics from the Graduate Institute of International Economics and Development Studies in Geneva. This is one of the very best institutions where you can do international economics. I know about that. And she also has, and that's quite impressive, another doctorate, and that is in mathematical methods, in statistical and mathematical methods in economics and social sciences or so. Now, about those doctorates in Italy, we can spend another hour discussing, yeah. But it's clear that she is one of the few experts in Europe that really knows about those fiscal rules that we have. She's written extensively about it. If you go to CEP's website, you find a long stream of work on exactly the topic that we're going to discuss today. She also teaches macroeconomics with the European flavor at the University of Ghent. She's the editorial board of Inter-Economics, and of Applied Economics Quarterly. So, Cinzia, it's great to have you. There are few people that are as competent than you to discuss these topics with us. And without further ado, I'm pleased to give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone, and many thanks, Gabriel, for the very nice introduction. So, yeah, maybe you asked me to explain what jobs and skills is. So, at SEPS now we have a new stream of research. It's actually not so new. It was used to focus on economic policy for the labor market, so social policy and labor markets. And we decided to rename it a few years ago and call it jobs and skills to to follow a bit the mainstream in the policy debate, whereby in the labor market now a lot of attention is actually devoted to skills, not anymore only education, and not anymore only the traditional labor economics. But let's start our evening and speak about the economic governance. I thought that it would be useful actually to start with a short historical overview. I mean, the economic governance basically was introduced in '99 with the Maastricht Treaty. And it has undergone a number of reforms and changes, especially after the financial crisis, so post-2010. And then a new process of review started in 2020, so every decade a change. And then I would like to focus my attention on the new framework, which basically has now the political agreement of the Council and the European Parliament, and is likely to define the next fiscal rules. This is a very complex argument. It's also extremely technical, so I'll try to remain at quite high level to give you a bit of a sense of the big changes. Now, let me start with the original design, so the monetary union. If we think of the monetary union in a rather simple way, this was basically built on three main pillars. The first one is single monetary policy. So national central banks give up basically the monetary policy, and this is centralized in the hands of the European Central Bank, which has one mandate: price stability. The second element of this model was to build a flexible economy, which was basically centered on the principle of the single market and the four freedoms, and in particular mobility of capital, labor, goods, and services. And in order to have a flexible economy where you have mobility of basically factor of production and products, you would also need to have some flexibility in prices and potentially also in wages in order to be able to adjust to shocks. And the third element, the third pillar of the construction, was fiscal rules. So there was this idea that basically the main source of shocks was fiscal. Therefore, it was important to have rules in order to limit ex ante the possibility of member states to define their fiscal policy in order to avoid to endanger the entire monetary union. And in the definition of the rules, the main focus was actually on the budget balance. So the main variable was really the budget balance. At the beginning, the rules were defined in terms of deficit. The 3% deficit was really the key variable. Next to it, 60% threshold for the debt in relation to GDP. This was then changed, at least the deficit threshold, in order to take into consideration cyclical conditions. Now, one important element of this construction was that basically state insolvency or sovereign crisis were not considered. This was not an element that was part of the design. It was just thought as something that wouldn't happen. And this was witnessed in a sense by the fact that, for instance, in financial regulations, sovereign bonds, and this is actually still the case, have zero risk weight. It means that there is zero risk associated to the default of a member of a sovereign that belongs to the monetary union. There was no monetary financing, so that basically the central bank cannot finance public debt, so the so-called monetary dominance. And then last but not least, the no bailout clause. So that basically the debt of a country cannot be taken over by other countries. The other element was that these rules, as I mentioned, were quite simple and basically focus on headline variables. Now, as you may know, some of you may know, of those three elements that were characteristic of the original design, a couple actually were not respected during the financial crisis. And this points really brings me to the fact that in 2010, basically the financial crisis, the financial crisis started at the end of 2008. It looks like ages. I mean, some of you in this room were just kids or newborn, but it looks really very far away. But this was really sort of dramatic moment for the monetary union and overall for the European Union. So this really led somehow to an existential crisis, exactly because it was something that was not foreseen. And the financial crisis basically acted as a trigger for sovereign debt crisis, which started in Greece and then spread also over other countries. Now, why this is such an important moment in relation to the fiscal rules? Because basically one of the lessons that was drawn from that experience was, besides the fact that we didn't have a banking union, we didn't have a financial safety net, so a lot of changes were introduced. One assessment, if you want, was the fiscal rules didn't work. That there was really this understanding that, especially in the case of Greece, that Greece was really considered as a clear example, that the rules failed. I mean, some of you may remember that there was an issue with reporting of statistics and numbers were doctored, but in any case, some countries had been running very large current account and fiscal deficit for years, which led basically to a situation of almost default of the Greek government. So basically, one of the responses was we need to reform the fiscal rules. We need to make sure that actually they work. And basically, a process of reform started. And there were two main changes. There were a lot of changes, but there were two main aspects, two main novelties, if you want, that were introduced. The first one was the European semester. So I will illustrate in a second how it looks like, but basically is a framework for policy coordination of member states. And to make sure that basically the Stability and Growth Pact is implemented properly. So there is more systematic consultation and monitoring of fiscal policy, budgetary policy at the level of the member states. And the second point is that the rules were made, were strengthened. And there was this idea that the SGP was not sufficiently binding, and there was this idea that besides fiscal rules, actually also macroeconomic imbalances could lead to crisis. Some of you may remember that in Spain and Ireland, actually the crisis was not driven by bad fiscal policies. It was basically a big housing boom and bust, so that there was the crisis at different sources. So there was this idea of a need for monitoring performance in terms of macroeconomic indicators. So this is basically just an illustration of the European semester cycle. It's called semester, in fact, is a year. And basically it's a process whereby governments need to submit to the Commission their budget plans. This is assessed and it's made sure that it's consistent with a forecast about developments in the economy and fiscal position, fiscal house is in order. Now, within this reform, which basically took place in 2011, there are a number of regulations and the directive, the so-called 6-pact and 2-pact. I'm not going into the details, but the bottom line was that the rules had to be made smarter. That was basically the terminology used, but also make sure that enforcement actually happens. And this was made possible in principle through the introduction of sanctions, additional sanctions. With the hindsight, I can tell you that not much of this actually worked. This explains what Gabriel said, because basically that has continued to increase, and the country-specific recommendations which come out of the semester, and this is what the national governments should implement, have only partially been implemented. Another, just an aside, but another novelty that was introduced with after the financial crisis is the fiscal compact. I think most people have forgotten about it, but this is basically, it's actually, the full name is Treaty on Stability, Coordination and Governance, which is an international treaty, so it's outside actually the EU treaties, and it was an attempt to constitutionalize fiscal rules. It was this idea that the fiscal rules, in order to ensure that they are enforced, should be put into the constitution. In fact, this has been done, but I realize actually that there is a typo because I didn't finish the sentence, but in fact, the reality is that everyone seems to have forgotten about it. So the bottom line is that the reform of the Stability and Growth Pact, which took place after the financial crisis, resulted in an increase in complexity. As I said, there are many regulations, directives, but also the possibility to account for specific cases and the possibility also for broad interpretation. But this led to increased complexity and also to lower predictability. And this is one of the key criticisms that basically emerged over the years. And for a number of reasons, and I will explain this in a moment, also the Commission found itself in a position of having to hold a sort of an ambiguous position, because the Commission is the guardian of the treaty, so it needs to make sure that actually rules are implemented, but at the same time it was called to exercise this discretion, which is typical of actually a political function. So quite a difficult situation. But the bottom line is that basically we had a decade of criticism over the rules, and quite some dissatisfaction, both at the level of the member states, those complying and those not complying, but also I think quite difficult situation again for the Commission, which led to many criticism, procyclicality, lack of enforcement, complexity. And I think it's quite interesting to link all these changes with politics, with political changes which are reflected in the leadership of the Commission, if you want, because I think this is interesting also to look at the way forward. I mean, if you think at the onset of the EMU, where we have simple rules which are quasi-automatic, at least that's the way they were presented, this is really the Maastricht vision that was dominant basically in '99. Then, again, some of you may remember that in 2002, Prodi, which was the president of the Commission, called the pact stupid. And in 2005, when basically France and Germany were about to breach the rules were reformed. And there was the concept of structural balance was introduced to replace the headline balance in order to take into account basically for the economic cycle. Then we have the financial crisis, and the debate is reopened. Some people, some economists for instance, Blanchard, at the time he was at the IMF, and was even put into question the need for rules and the need to get back discretion in order to be able to respond to crisis. In the end, we took a different way, and the rules were reinforced. However, Juncker, in 2014, when he becomes president of the Commission, it qualifies his Commission as political, a political Commission. And this opened the ground for a more flexible interpretation of the rules, and in fact, sanctions, which were supposed to be applied, there was a case of France, Italy, but also Spain and Portugal, in the end were never applied. We need also to keep in mind that we were in a period politically quite difficult. So we had quite a long recession. 2016, does anyone remember what happened in 2016? There was a referendum, so the Brexit referendum, and the UK basically deciding to exit the European Union, and in several countries we see the emergence of more nationalistic parties. So it is in this context that basically the interpretation of the rules becomes more relaxed. And then in 2019 we have the von der Leyen Commission, which qualify itself as geopolitical, basically marking a complete change of priorities in terms of the objectives of the Commission. So we will have the elections now in June. We will have a new Commission in the fall. So the question is what kind of Commission we will have, and to what extent this new Commission may affect the implementation of the new fiscal rules. So let me come now to this reform. As I said, there was quite a high level of dissatisfaction, and in 2020, February 2020, just before COVID, just before the first lockdown, the European Commission decided to launch a process of economic governance review. This was basically entailing a large set of consultations of experts, member states, stakeholders. Everyone was invited actually to bring his view about how the rules could look like. Now, the process was interrupted. We know COVID started, and the rules were suspended. There was the activation of the general escape clause, whereby basically member states, governments were made free to undertake budgetary measures given the exceptional circumstances. And the process was reactivated in October 2021, and about 1 year ago, the Commission published its proposal, a proposal for the new governance framework. It was quite rich, having different aspects. In December of 2023, the Council reached the first political agreement. Basically, the main lines of the Commissions were agreed. However, some changes were also proposed. Just a bit more, about 1 month ago, the EP and the Council reached their own political agreement. So now there is really the expectation that this new framework will be in place. How does it look like? Let me just highlight a few points. So when the Commission started to look at the inputs that came from these different stakeholders, there were really a lot of meetings with experts. One of the main objectives was really simplification. So there was really an understanding that the over-complexity actually contributed to the lack of enforcement. And this idea of simplification was basically led to put actually debt sustainability at the very center of the new governance framework. So it was really a move from focusing on deficits towards debt, and to debt not as a simple threshold, not the 60% remains, but what matters about debt is actually the pattern and the sustainability in the longer term. And basically, this is done through a plan. So each government needs to come up with a plan which is negotiated and agreed with the Commission. And within this plan, there is a path for debt sustainability. For countries which have high debt, of course, this requires a reduction in the debt. That should be ensured by focusing on one single operational variable, which is the net primary government expenditure. Which, again, this becomes a key variable. There are two other interesting aspects that basically within the plan, governments can foresee investment and reforms. There was this idea that rules should not be made pro-cyclical, and given the needs for investment for the twin transition, the green and the digital transition, governments which actually implement and put in place the necessary investment can have a longer horizon in order to achieve their debt reduction. This should also contribute to ownership, because basically the plans are individual and specific to the country, so they are tailored to the needs of the country. One interesting aspect is, for instance, that the escape clause, so next to the general escape clause, which is basically deviation from the path that is established in the plan, which is associated with major macroeconomic needs, or if you want, crisis. Also country-specific a situation can actually trigger the activation of the specific escape clause under the agreement of the Council. And then, of course, in case of deviation or in case of excessive deficit procedure, countries need to implement corrective procedures. Now, this is the overarching and very simplified description of the framework. Let me highlight, just have a couple of slides, what are the key features. As I said, the first one is really simplification. And one way to simplify was really to move away from this concept of structural deficit, which was introduced in 2005. The idea was really to bring in cyclical conditions and to avoid that the rules were pro-cyclical. But the reality is that this really didn't work and made things quite complicated, because the calculation of the structural deficit is basically based on the calculation of the output gap, which is something which is unobservable and therefore very difficult to track properly. This structural deficit has been, as I mentioned already, abandoned in favor of this net primary expenditure, which is basically the government domestic expenditure, net of interest, net of discretionary revenues, net of cyclical unemployment, and net of EU funds, which are fully funded. Now, of course, I mean, in the new rules, there are so-called safeguards, and also which brings back, basically bring back this structural variable. But it remains a fact that there is a major attempt for simplification. The second element is ownership. So basically, there was the idea that the lack of enforcement of the previous framework was mostly due to the lack of ownership. The rules were considered as something imposed by Brussels on the governments, so governments actually could blame Brussels whenever they wanted. And the need for greater ownership is seen, well, let's see how it works, is seen key in order to ensure enforcement. And this is basically achieved through the design of these plans, which should be really tailored on the needs of the countries. Then the flexibility. This is made possible exactly because of the plans are tailored on the needs, and because the time framework for the adjustment it's 4 years. So it's not that every year that there is an objective to be met, and this can be extended up to 7 years in case under certain situation, in particular for investment for the twin transition. However, I mean, the safeguards and the fact that the threshold of 3% and 60% remains in the treaty remains an element of rigidity in the new framework. Then reforms and public investment, this is very new. I mentioned it earlier. It's really this idea that rules should not be procyclical, and in time of recession should not amplify the negative impact of the macroeconomic conditions. This is something that has been inspired clearly by Next Generation EU and the Recovery and Resilience Fund. This is, again, this will be a bit of a test, something new. The last element, again, is credibility and enforcement, which I think are key. And I think somehow this is the most fragile or vulnerable element of the new framework, at least in my view. Because I think that if these elements, if for any reason, and that there are some reasons to believe that actually the rules are not successful at the very beginning, this may really hamper the credibility of the entire system. And basically what I have in mind is that we are in a situation where because of COVID and the very expansionary fiscal policy, deficits are quite large. Many countries are above 3%, and the debt is very high. This implies that a number of countries actually need to implement quite substantial consolidation. If it's not too large, still a consolidation over several years. And this is going to require a lot of willingness from the side of governments to implement this kind of policies. Now, my concern is that if we do not comply and we get off the track from the very beginning, that the credibility of the system may be affected. So just to throw some conclusions, now, the approach to the EU fiscal governance has changed substantially over time, and there was a lot of, I mean, many attempts actually to learn from the crisis. Now, it's, we also need to understand that every crisis is different from the previous one. So it's also very important that we learn from the past, but we do not design a framework for the last war. We really need to look what comes next. One important factor of change has really be the move from deficit to debt sustainability, and from short-term to long-term. I think this is a major change, which I think it's very important. However, we need to make sure that it works. And in this framework, and this is my view, a lot of the responsibility is brought back at the national level. Because the plans are designed by the member states on their needs. I mean, of course, it needs to be agreed by the Commission, but there should be much more ownership, but also responsibilities, because ownership and responsibility go together. As I mentioned just a moment ago, I think that the short term is going to be challenging. And I think that a failure could really jeopardize credibility. And last but not least, politics matter. So let's see what the European election will bring us. Thank you very much.
Cinzia, maybe here.
Thank you.
So now I think we have a wonderful overview of the past and the present of fiscal rules in the European Union or in the Euro system. As you see, we started a little bit late, and we will overdo a little bit the time frame that we have. Target to be ending here at 8:10 instead of 8, and make sure that we have a small round of questions for the floor as well. But the time frame is as it is. Therefore, let me be very brief in introducing the panelists. Let me start with Dr. Birgit Niesner. Please, Dr. Birgit Niesner is since October first in 21, the Director of Economic Analysis and Research at the Austrian National Bank. It's very important to have a central banker here in this conversation. She was surprised when she was nominated at this position because she has a career rather in the banking world. She comes with a practitioner's maybe CV, which I think is great. There's a lot of theorists in these rooms. It's good to have someone who knows the business. She was at the Raiffeisen Bank International, at Erste Group. And she has also a very interesting academic background. I didn't know about that. She has a master in economics, of course, as everyone decent has, in particular from this university. But she also has a master in social anthropology of the University of Vienna. It's great. Let's talk later how that influences your work. And a master also of the London School of Economics. So 3 masters and a PhD that she defended here at this university. So it's great to have you, Birgit. By the way, Birgit is also connected to WIFO. This is part of our funding structure is from the National Bank. Then I'd like to say hello to Tim Joris Kaiser. Please, Tim. Tim is an advisor on economic governance at the European Commission, and he's based here at the EU's representation in Vienna. He's been in Vienna since September 21. Before that, he had various other positions at the European Commission. Before that, he also has a life in the private sector. Before that, which is interesting, Hewlett-Packard and Holcim, and he holds a degree from Maastricht University, and that also means that he is not just. I think you come from northern Germany, but you're fluent in Dutch, and
correct.
And you know, if I read the CV, it's a truly European CV, no, with all these many languages that you speak and the exposure to many European countries. Last but not least, and with a special pleasure, I'd like to ask Atanas Pekanov to the stage. Atanas is a very famous guy because he's the only one on this panel who has a Wikipedia page in 4 languages. In German, that's okay because he works at the Austrian Institute, at my institute, and just defended his PhD thesis actually at this university. So that's normal that he has a German Wikipedia page, but he has a much longer English Wikipedia page as well, and he has a page in Bulgarian and one in Polish. So 4 languages, Wikipedia, that's quite something. Why is that? That's of course because he's one of our very active members at the Austrian Institute of Economic Research. That makes you famous and well known. But he also has something very special that not many at the WIFO have. He has worked in government. And twice in a caretaker government in Bulgaria, he was vice prime minister. And he was responsible for, well, the fiscal arrangements of his country with the European Union. In particular, the implementation of the recovery and reconstruction facility and the Next Generation EU project. And so it's very good to have you here because you've been in the middle of the policy discussion. And this, if you take those 2 stints at government together, it's 1.5 a year or something like that, that you've been in this office. I know about, well, I don't say it, but there are politicians who don't, you know, who don't make it that long in government. So it's good to have you all here. And because time is scarce, I would like to start with you. Birgit, on just giving us maybe 4 minutes of your takeaways of this presentation, and where you, as you know, with your central banking background, would complement Cinzia's presentation.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. I'm very happy to be here. And I'm also very, very happy to work in monetary policy, because whenever I hear the fiscal policy people, I really admire the complexity and the things you have to go through. I mean, we have seen also quite some crises on our side, but coming back, and I'll highlight a few points I liked or I did not like so much in the slides, not because I don't like Cinzia's slides, but because I don't like the fiscal rules. Page 3, you said 3 pillars of the EMU, Economic and Monetary Union. Yeah? that's a very important point, because I'm very, I don't want this to sound something like arrogant, but I think that the first pillar, monetary policy, is the one which is the strongest, yeah? And which has very often had the task to stabilize crises. And that's really a role where we want to get away from. We don't want to be the only game in town. We really need a sound fiscal coordination among member states in order to relieve us from this responsibility. Second point I would like to strengthen is you referred to the role of politics and of crisis, and Jean Monnet's saying is confirmed by what you say. Europe is forged in crisis. So it's really always, we move ahead if and when we have a problem. You pointed this out correctly, that excessive deficit procedures, the so-called EDPs, they were opened. We all know that the implementation, while a big country was in the EDP, was not always what we expected it to be. So there was weak enforcement. I'm not super convinced that it will get better, but we'll get this, I hope, as a question. Yeah? I'm also disappointed by the, in German you would say, totgesagte Leben länger, but this same old feeling that the structural indicators, they have not disappeared. They have been mixed with other indicators. It's a certain sense of window dressing. And I think one thing I am also disappointed at is that the role of the institutional fiscal councils has not been strengthened. In the Austrian Central Bank, we host the Austrian Fiscal Council. I doubt about the governance, and this would have been a very, very good way where you have super professionals working to give them more say, more authority. Last sentence. The most important sentence on your slides was on the, I think it was the last slide, these rules will be tested. The markets are waiting for their chance to see whether we mean whether this is serious business or not.
Okay. Thank you, Birgit. This was rather skeptical.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
The timing, I think the timing is okay. But the message, I think, is well heard. And now, maybe you're not surprised that I turn to you, Tim, because...
For a more positive spin?
Yes, of course, because your role here, I guess, is to defend what the Commission has invented, and and so I'm curious what your response is to Cinzia, but of course also to Birgit.
Quite so. Thanks very much also from my side. First off, obviously, for the invitation and for the kind introduction, and also to all of you. And hope we'll get to the question round, of course, as well. And in that spirit, indeed, let me also make 3 points, in fact, on the presentation. And indeed, I mean, I do represent the Commission here, first and foremost, defending, of course, our own proposals and the role that we play, let's say. What we're discussing now, of course, is the political agreement that Parliament and Member States have found. But even so, we're, as the Commission, quite happy with the retention of the key aspects, let's say, of this. So let me make the 3 points on the presentation briefly. The first relates to my own biography, as Gabriel has already referred to it, because this was a bit of a throwback, in fact, the historical slides that you had there. I started at the Commission in 2011, and that was with ECFIN, the Economic and Financial Affairs Department, shall we say, Directorate General. And at the time, of course, this was the immediate aftermath of the financial crisis. For one thing, my department, the DG ECFIN, really had to get used to the politics, shall we say, at that point already, from what it previously was a bit of an, no disparaging remark here, but a bit of an academic affair, shall we say, of just looking at things in theory, let's say, and how could this work, how could that work, and we were really thrust into the limelight with that, really, let's say. It was also the reason that lots of economists at the time got hired, so it worked for me in a sense. But this was interesting times, and it's in a very real aspect, of course, precisely what you described, the politicization, that then went on, exactly as you said, under the Juncker Commission in particular. And with the dealing of the crisis, and we spent lots of time talking about the six-pack, the two-pack, and so on and so forth, of course, including to try and explain this to external stakeholders, including international partners, such as in the US, which was not an easy task, I can tell you, because, of course, the complexity is one of those points that we'll get to as well. So I spent 10 years working in the Commission in Brussels, in 2 departments in ECFIN, and then later on in DG Trade, which is another matter that's close to Gabriel's heart, at least, before I came here in 2021 indeed. And what I now work on, and that's where I get to my second point, is precisely the RF that Atanas also had to do with. That's the Recovery and Resilience Facility. That was basically member states came up with that in response to the COVID crisis that hit all member states at the same time and in the same manner, which is an essential difference to what the origin of the financial crisis and the, shall we say, the fallout was in terms of precisely the fiscal stability that formed the position, let's say, that member states had previously, and that then was impacted by a market reaction, shall we say, to the financial crisis. We may get into that a little bit later. But the point that I'd like to make, and this is the second point, is that the core aspect, which I would also like to highlight here in regards to the economic governance framework now, is the emphasis on reforms and incentives. Because that's precisely what, in the longer term, I'm convinced will make the difference. Now, the RF works in such a way that funds, essentially, money is only handed out with after it was proven that certain milestones were achieved. We call that the performance-based instrument, and this mechanism is now returning also in the economic governance framework. That was part of the key part, I would say, of the Commission proposal, and so we're particularly happy that that was, of course, retained with the current proposal. Now, parts of those were already taken up also in, for instance, the Balkans Growth Fund, another initiative by the Commission, so no coincidence, but interestingly was also already taken up in Austrian politics in the so-called Future Fund that was recently proposed last year. So that mechanism of a performance base that you provide an incentive, and we may get to that later, but in the scheme of the European Union in particular, but also all international relations and even domestic fiscal relations, as is the case of Austria highlights, it's immensely difficult, of course, to actually provide an incentive. So this is what member states, under the extreme circumstances of COVID, were able to agree on, that money would really only be paid out on proof of a performance, basically, so that milestones were actually achieved. This is the returning mechanism that I'd like to really highlight here in Cinzia's presentation as well, because this is what in the longer term is, I would say, the best possible, and of course the Commission's role is, as per the usual, dealing with the art of the possible in the world of politics. I'm tempted to quote, it was probably Churchill again, but some famous person that said, like, if both sides are criticizing you, must be doing something right. That certainly seems to be the current position of the Commission in all sorts of dossiers, but certainly here as well. So that's the second point. And third and last, I agree with certainly with Birgit's point that the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. And so the very last point that you made, that these rules that we've come up with, still somewhat theoretically, will now have to prove their mettle, basically. And one illustrative example that I'd like to list is that of the politics of Belgium, which is roughly comparable, at least in size, to Austria. And they will have a vote on the 9th of June, in fact, as well. So along with the European elections, they're also voting nationally and at the local level. So they've got another one of those mega election years. But what's proving immensely difficult already now is precisely the foreshadow of of the governance framework, essentially. Because it's clear to them, and that there we get into the field of ownership, which is a very important point as well, that they will have to make a fiscal effort, as we call that in the somewhat theoretical language, but that they'll just have to realize savings, basically, in all sorts of ways in their governance spending. And that's going to be hard. That will have repercussions in that governance framework here, but that will also obviously have very real repercussions in people's lives, essentially, because governments don't spend money for just anything, basically, sort of thing, but all these both expenditure and revenue sources have real consequences. So, I mean, I very much agree with the ultimate conclusion, basically, that the long-term reforms and incentives, but the short-term will prove whether any of this really works.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tim. Let me now come to Atanas. Now, you have spent some time in politics, and what chance do you give this new set of fiscal rules? Will policymakers at the national level abide by the rules, or will it just go, be treated as the former sets of rules that we have that were not completely, let's say, respected?
Very good question. Thank you, Gabriel. First of all, let me thank the WU for hosting us, and Gabriel and WIFO for organizing this, and Cinzia for the very great overview of a very complicated topic. Ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and wrong, are more powerful than commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little less. This is something said by Keynes 100 years ago, and I think it's still the case. Behind all of these technical discussions, the fiscal rules, I think, have, in a sense, shaped the response to our crisis in the last 20 years in Europe. In one way, in the euro area debt crisis, and another way in the pandemic, when we actually switched them off, which already tells you a bit what I think about them. I was about to say that for many years we have found a lot of problems and challenges to the fiscal rules. I would not go so far to call them stupid, but now that I know that Prodi called them stupid, I think I'm also allowed to do that. But with time, I also realized how many positives common rules actually also bring us, because they give clarity, transparency, and this is something that we wanted to improve, that the current stand of the rules, first of all, didn't bring enough transparency because of the many changes that happened in the meantime since the initial rules. And also, they didn't give us any clarity because they were not credible. Why they were not credible? Because in many sense they were not feasible. They exacted too high cost of adjustment, let's call them, so fiscal cuts. In crisis or in good times, they were actually not exacting enough because they were not strict enough in good times. And that is why they were deemed as ineffective already before the pandemic. The goal of all of these discussions was to improve them. Now, what is the final outcome? Well, I would say not great, not terrible. So we moved on some areas. On some areas, I think governments will behave better. In other areas, I'm not so sure whether we moved in front. What are the good sides? So one good side is that some of the most rigid aspects of the rules, some of the aspects that I think actually didn't help us through crisis periods, like the rule that you have to decrease your debt by 1/20 if you're above the 60% target, which was very unfeasible for some countries, is now not anymore in effect. It was something that was completely unrealistic. And we want to have rules, but we want to have rules that are actually smart, right? Because otherwise we don't believe them and we don't follow them. In the same sense, there are other parts of the reform that are enabling member states now to do more of the necessary investments. For example, and this is very technical, but actually with a very powerful implication that member states will be able to exempt some of their expenditure or on expenditures they make on EU-funded programs from their Maastricht criteria, deficit criteria. So that means that when you're doing some investments which are co-funded, so you're co-funding it as a member state, but also the EU is co-funding them. These are normally projects where Europe has a common interest, for example, the Green Deal or the digital transition or cross-border activities, railway, transport, important things where I believe we have to invest more. Well, the national co-financing will now be exempted from your requirements to achieve some target in terms of expenditure. So these are good developments, and they will have also a clear, I think, positive. There are, however, also developments which put the whole structure under question. I think this was well also embedded in Cynthia's presentation. First and foremost, the rules are now even less transparent. I mean, if you look at that, actually this was a very, very good presentation. I think, Cynthia, I will ask you to use it in my classes because we cover these things, and I'm happy to say that we cover some of these things already. I'm happy to see some of my students here, but the whole thing is very, very complicated. It takes 2 or 3 classes, I think, to explain it, and not to mention how much effort it takes to actually monitor this. So we didn't manage to simplify the framework, we actually made it even more difficult. The second issue I have is that, well, member states, the bilateral negotiations, the fact that there will be, in a sense, we moved in the area of a bit of using standards for different countries based on where they are. I thought many years ago that this, well, not so many, was a good thing when also Blanchard was proposing it, etc., etc. Now, when I had also the experience of negotiating with the European Commission when I was in the Bulgarian government, which was always a very fruitful discussion, but very hard discussion and very hard negotiations, I saw the dangers of this. Bilateral negotiations, they put member states partly, so to say, against the Commission, not in a bad sense, but in the end you're negotiating on some reforms and investments. The European Commission is bound to exact as many reforms from you as a government as possible. That is clear and that is completely fine. But of course, member states are also able to fight back against it and see some of these reforms as too difficult. So these bilateral negotiations, they bring some dangers. And we see this now with the implementation of the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Governments always have the incentive to kind of turn back on the most difficult reforms. If not them, their opposition will make them turn back on these most difficult reforms sooner or when the opposition comes into power, because one of the things that is certain in life is that the opposition sooner or later comes into power, and then they, of course, have the incentive to say, no, we don't like what was achieved before as a compromise. Let's find a new compromise because we think other stuff should be done. Now, if we think that we will be able to put down the reforms that need to be done in a member state for the next 7 years, and that governments will keep to these reforms that was set up in 1 year in the next 7 years, I very much doubt that will work in this way. Finally, I wanted to say that one of the things that maybe it's not so good, this from a very country-wise perspective, Bulgaria is one of the countries with the lowest debt to GDP ratio in Europe, the second lowest, 24% debt to GDP. I don't consider this optimal from a macroeconomic point of view. I think that means that for many years maybe we were not investing enough, but it has the bonus that we have very high macro stability. The markets don't put us under any pressure or question in terms of our debt sustainability. And the current reform doesn't incentivize in any ways those countries that overperform, those countries that have very, very low debt to GDP ratios. So to finish, I would say that, well, I wanted to say what Birgit said, but she stole my quote from Monet, because she was before me, but I have another one even better from Monet. What Monet says, another one is, well, we need Europe for what is essential. And for me, it seems in the 21st century, a lot of the investment will be essential to make it at the European level. So we'll need more flexibility to make the investments that will make Europe stronger in this very volatile geopolitical world. These are infrastructure investments, transport investments, even very simple railway investments, which we didn't do enough. And we can do and should do because they also serve the goal of the Green Deal. They serve the goal of sustainability. So we'll need more flexibility. I'm not sure whether this is embedded well enough, but for sure there is some hope that at least the new rules are more flexible in some way than the other. These might sound as technical things, but in fact I think they really determine the overall economic policy of all member states, and this is also what determines the welfare and the security of European citizens. So thank you.
Very good, thank you, Atanas. Jean's here.
Can I react very quickly to...
Yes, I just wanted to invite you to do that, but be extremely brief because we have very little time.
Very brief. I will just cherry pick a few points. The IFIs, the independent fiscal institution, I agree with you. And I mean, this was not what the Commission proposed, so that a much bigger role was given to these independent fiscal institutions, and it came to me actually quite a surprise that their role has been diminished, while it has been the one of the European Fiscal Board has become more prominent. And I also agree with you that their role in terms of putting some pressure domestically on governments, but also monitoring, I think it's a loss for the functioning of the rules. Then very briefly on Tim's point on Belgium. So yesterday in Belgium we had the second strike against future austerity. That is expected to come with the new fiscal rules. So just to give you a sense of how the political debate is evolving in a country which will have elections in June. So again, these are technical things, but which have impact on people's life, and debate is mounting in emphasizing actually this aspect. Quickly on Atanas' point on the bilateral negotiations. I agree with you. I think there it's a really big question mark whether this can be a new way of making the rules functioning, or making the rules failing, huh? Because it's going to be a bit of a bet in terms of defining actually how the plans in the end will look like, and but also the relations between the Commission and the Member States. I will leave it here.
Thank you, Cinzia. Birgit, you ended your intervention before by saying that those rules will be tested by the markets. I think this is a little bit of a statement that could help with some clarification. Now you know the markets, you've been in the markets, so what is your fear precisely?
I think it's not very satisfying that, I mean, I see the European interest. I also see the possibility, by the way, I want to make a positive point, yeah, that the European-wide investment and future-oriented investment is made easier with this framework. But I'm not happy that countries, you heard it, 24% public debt to GDP, like Bulgaria, are treated with the same rules. And now I will make the bad girl, Italy, yeah, to say a name. Yeah? So I think this differentiation between high-debt countries and low-debt countries, which was in place, albeit with really stupid, I mean, this 1/20th rule was ridiculous. Yeah, we are very happy that we got rid of this, but we should better differentiate between countries which face a challenge and other countries which don't face a similar challenge. I mean, everybody is challenged with huge investments in the digital and green future. Yeah, that's nothing a country can spare. But I have the feeling that we don't create enough transparency and enough credibility how the highly indebted countries will come down with their debt in a feasible, realistic, and timely manner. And for that, I know that you need the 7 years for the investment perspective, but 7 years for the markets. If governments start backloading on this, yeah, and then you can renegotiate your fiscal structural plan as soon as a new government is in place, for markets that's too little promise of fiscal consolidation, yeah. And it's not. I'm not here preaching here for fiscal austerity as a principle, but I really just want to make you understand that we have countries, we have a very heterogeneous euro area, and that and that's why I'm coming back now again to the position as a monetary policy maker, if things go wrong, the problem ends up with the ECB. Yeah? And then we have, since last year, we have a transmission protection instrument. This is exactly a way to intervene into the markets if Italian or some other yields go through the roof, but this is definitely nothing we want to activate. That's really the last thing we want to do. And before that, we need sound fiscal rules with heavy implementation in the euro area.
Let me ask an additional question here. There's, economists in this room know what the term fiscal dominance means. No, it's a little bit of a nightmare of monetary authorities that their field of action is constrained by overly generous fiscal policies. Is this a true worry that you have? Because it could mean that fighting inflation becomes more difficult given the fact that we have debt levels in Italy, Belgium, other countries, France, no, that are indeed out of control, and there's little confidence in the markets that this set of rules actually can contain them.
Yeah. And it's, and the question was, that makes our life much more complicated.
Yes.
Yeah.
And does it endanger achieving price stability? Or does it just make it more costly?
If we have this sort of chaotic situation coming back to the times of the Eurozone, it means that the transmission of monetary policy is made difficult, yeah? Because you send the same signal to very different countries, yeah? And some of the countries can still afford, for instance, a higher interest rate, yeah? And other countries cannot afford it anymore. Yeah? And this is exactly this kind of danger zone where we have to get away from, yeah? Because if we don't have to care about the fiscal situation of countries, we can set the interest rates where the business cycle needs it. Yeah? And you all, maybe I'm not know, but for the young people here in the room, yeah, this is a very, very sensitive gray area for the ECB. And when President Lagarde was new in her job, she said, and she was right, she said, we are not here for yield control. That means exactly, yeah, we're not going to intervene to protect Italian yields going through the roof, yeah, because that's not our mandate. Our mandate is price stability. But of course, markets took it very, very, very wrongly. Yeah? But may I just maybe say one other, because I don't want to be here the disaster lady, and already before
it's good
this,
for the show.
It's good for the but already, I hope we don't enter this danger zone. But also in normal times, we would need this euro area fiscal stance. We need a clear euro area fiscal stance, and with the new rules, I don't see it. We have a lot of country specificities, and we have a lot of opaqueness, and sorry, I have a lot of black box feeling on the new rules. Yeah? So the cornerstone is this DSA, debt sustainability analysis, and it's done in the rooms of bureaucrats, ministers, and will we be able to judge the quality of it? I don't know. What we really know is, what we really would need from a monetary policy side is to see clearly Europe is fiscally expansive or contractionary. And then we can coordinate our policies, because we had this problem that in the recession years mentioned by Cinzia, we would have loved states to be fiscally more expensive, but everybody was still burned by the Eurozone crisis. Now we have the opposite. We are tightening, and we would need fiscal tightening as well. But we know ex post, maybe after we have all the data, that this was the euro area fiscal stance from the new rules. I will not be able to read it, and that's very bad news also for normal times.
Okay, thank you very much. Tim, debt sustainability, that appeared here in many interventions. Now when I have to explain to students what sustainable debt means, is 90% of GDP okay, or can you do 150? Why is debt of 220% or so sustainable in Japan? And some African countries struggle with 10 or 15% of debt in their GDP. So what's the philosophy here? I mean, I think, from theory-wise, I would say yes, indeed. Debt sustainability, that's what we need to ensure. But in practical terms, how do you operationalize it?
Right.
I think it's an unfair question, but it's an important one.
I'll try and get there, but let me maybe make one small remark on your previous question, which was to do with the markets and the spreads and the yields and so on and so forth. And I think, that also comes down to the answer, the non-technical answer, shall we say, to your debt sustainability question, which is confidence. That's really what it's all about, obviously. That's what the market sentiment that we could keep talking about, of course, is ultimately determined by as well. The market, individual investors, institutions, and so on and so forth, are either convinced that Italy, since that was mentioned, will be able to repay its debt in future, or they're not. And that determines the spread, which, by the way, in the aftermath of the financial crisis, we looked at absolutely obsessively, just how much individual states had to pay on their debt, and what the spread of that to German bonds was, sort of thing. So that was the benchmark at the time. So the debt yield, the debt spread, and so on and so forth. I guess for many of you that will be those will be known terms. So confidence, and here I'm really going to break a lance for this particular economic governance framework, but also basically public management as it was conducted in the last. I'm going to say I started in 2011, so that's what the period that I'll talk about, sort of thing. But the counterfactual scenario here is basically that things could have gone much, much worse, essentially. And of course, Mario Draghi's "whatever it takes" in 2012, that's another of those famous quotes, had a large role to do with that, let's say. But so did the concert, basically, not only the Commission clearly, sort of thing, but with a guiding, a leading role, let's say, in that. How the member states came together, how the EU came together. And here I'd, again, like to get back to the RRF and the follow-on experience, basically, from the financial crisis. I already said that this was a different nature, the crisis had a different nature, sort of thing, because it hit everybody more or less in the same way. But the way that we reacted really managed to restore that confidence and, basically avoided precisely the situation that we found ourselves in after the financial crisis, that markets did have to worry about, whether Italy was going to repay its debt in future, sort of thing, right? So things could have gone much worse, and therefore Europe seems to have done quite well under difficult circumstances. Now, to get back to your question on debt sustainability and the more technical answer, I think Cinzia obviously went into that a little bit in her presentation as well. And I would also defend the aspect of the simplification. I agree with Atanas that it still remains complex sort of thing, but it did get, for practitioners at least, a little less confidence, a little less complex. And that will have to, again, prove its mettle now in the sort of the backroom dealing, let's say, of how we indeed operationalize that. I've got to admit, I mean, I was close to the process in the 10 years that I spent in ECFIN, and it is a little arcane, honestly. But the output of that, and that's what I would get back to, is the confidence-inspiring and the ultimately successful procedure in that.
Okay.
The change, of course, from the previous to the framework now that is about to be decided finally, is that we're focusing on one more simple term, basically. We're defining that term more clearly. The reason that we've maintained the 3 and the 60% is also, in a way, markets, because, I mean, of course, at least those are variables, let's say, that are easily identified. And ultimately, we will be expressing confidence in the medium-term structural fiscal paths. It's a long phrase, of course, but like of the individual member states. Mm-hmm. And that's how it's done.
Okay, very good. At the end, it will be the markets who will put this whole system to a test. We always have market discipline, no? That can also force governments to be more responsible. And in a monetary union as we are, no? It's the balance is difficult between allowing the market to, do their job and discipline governments and the working of monetary policy for the entire zone. Let me come to you and ask, we have a couple of minutes for your questions. Please be short and concise and prepare them. Just come to Atanas, a very small question. Atanas, governments run up debts, no, not Bulgaria so much, but it's not just governments who run up debts. Now we have also central debt taken up by the European Union for years. Eurobonds were impossible to think about. I remember Angela saying, only over my dead body, no? To cite another not very Merkelian statement, actually, not surprising for this woman, but she said that. Nur über meine Leiche. Now we have quite a chunk of common debt. We also have the EIB who runs up debt. We have the ESM and so on. Do you think more of that will be coming precisely because the fiscal rules at the national level are, becoming tighter, either because markets enforce them or because the rules enforce them? So is the escape road maybe also for the German government to say, okay, now if we can't finance our infrastructure investment by debt nationally, let's take up European debt? No? Do you think this is? You have renegotiated the NGEU. Is this an option?
Tiny question.
Give the question to
30 seconds.
I will give a very very positive spin on this. Well, I believe not only because member states might be limited in how much they can spend, but also because it makes more sense for some things to be done at the European level. As I mentioned, there are common priorities that we share, I believe, all of us in Europe, and such common priorities, some of them should be and will be more efficient if we do it at the European level. I mentioned some transport, infrastructure. I was, last week I was in Italy and I always get impressed for super fast trains with which you can actually move very efficiently in Italy. Not always the case in Germany, as we know. So there are many things that we can do more efficiently at the European level. It will leave more space for the national governments for those things that should be done at the national level, and it will be more efficient at the European level, and some of that should be financed by debt. This is clear.
Okay, very good. So this was the answer I was hoping for. Now, yes, I know you have a question. Let me see, who wants to ask questions? There's a question here, over there. Okay, but please we start with you and then we come to you.
How do you think...
And please say your name and also to whom you address the question.
My name is Vasil Gagiev, and I address it to anybody who wants to answer it. I just want to ask a brief question. How do you think a second Trump term could impact fiscal stability in Europe?
Oh, okay. While we think here collectively on this very difficult question, maybe can we ask you for your question, please?
My name is Wheatley, I'm a journalist. I have two short questions. The first is a technical question. I'm very interested to get the folios of your keynote presentation. Is that possible?
Yes.
My second question is to the moderator. I hope this is okay for you. In your youngest book, you wrote some ideas on reforms of the European Union, and I would like to know if the new generation of rules which we were discussing are meeting your ideas in your youngest book.
Okay, so who here at this podium is bold enough to answer the Trump question? Tim?
I'll give it a shot, yeah?
Please.
So from my perspective, basically it won't. What will determine fiscal stability in Europe is the European response, either way. And it really could go either way. I mean, as we've seen in the geopolitical context, of course, you know, I mean, one reaction to a even potential another Trump presidency is that Europe actually, one might say, starts getting its act together and starts spending more on defense, for instance, right? Now, mutatis mutandis kind of thing in the fiscal stability space. There may be a market reaction, but the crucial issue really is going to be the reaction by Europe and in particular the member states.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add something?
On Trump?
Well, I think actually it will strengthen us. It will strengthen us because we'll do more together. That will most probably mean more debt. And in the end, if you want to be a strong geopolitical player, you want to have others hold your debt. So the US is at the center of the global financial system because the US Treasury bonds are the most secure asset in the world and all of the others hold it. We want in the long future, I think, Europe to have this place as well.
Mm-hmm. Can I just add something? So, I mean, one way to read it is what Athena said, no? So you are in a situation whereby Europe will be more isolated because we are in... we are speaking about strategic autonomy, open strategic autonomy, and this idea that Europe needs to reduce its dependencies. But now we are in a situation where the United States is a key ally for the EU, not only for defense, but also in terms of trade. Now, if there is a second term for Trump, the situation is going to be much more difficult from a European perspective, and it's unclear whether, I would say that actually it's very likely that the US will not be seen as a reliable partner as it is now. So this may trigger a need for strengthening this economic security and strategic autonomy. These are two concepts which have a geopolitical dimension and more economic dimension, and both of them needs to be strengthened, which, if we want to link it to public finances, would mean spending more for defense, but not only. More probably for technology, because we know that technology and investment in technology will be key, but also green. Which is, I think it's going to put a greater pressure on public finances, whether this is at the level of the member states or at the level of the European level, with more need to join forces and to spend more together, which would imply to find some own resources. Because maybe in response to your point, whether we are going to see next generation 2.0 or another round of debt, I think that there is a certain desirability, and I think it would make sense for certain kind of spending. But if we want to go that way, we need absolutely to agree on having some common resources, which could be used as a guarantee, as a way to repay the debt, because otherwise we are not going to be credible for financial markets. I mean, in fact, for next generation EU, it's still unclear at the moment how we are going to repay the money and the interest on that debt, because the macroeconomic environment has changed a lot, so interest rates has increased. This has become much more expensive. So this is not an impossible task. It's feasible, but if we want to go for another big chunk of common issuances, we also need to make sure that we have the resources and credible resources to ensure that this is paid back.
Yeah, very important point, Cinzia. Again, the market will be the ultimate judge on this. Thank you, Mr. Sweetley, for your question. Of course, I'm flattered that you have read my book. It's Europa muss sich rechnen. It's still quite fresh and out there for sales. Now, what I do in that book is, is a little bit of, providing almost a utopian view of what Europe should be doing for us. And part of, healing the European problems must be to completing the economic and monetary union. Now we say economic and monetary union. And so we have monetary union, and that works well. I think the ECB is set up as a decent central bank. It has all these national central banks attached to it. It has its own fabric, as the Fed has, also the districts. But what we really must see is that if we want to stabilize the European integration project, we probably need to have a common fiscal capacity. It need not be extremely big. People who try to estimate how big it needs to be, let's say 4%, 6% of GDP, something like that. And of course, when we now talk about a new vademecum, the old vademecum had 225 pages. The new vademecum is much more simpler. It has only 211 pages or something like that. So we have these fiscal rules that are somehow born out of this asymmetry or incompleteness of the European project, that we have a common monetary policy but not a common fiscal policy. No power for the European Parliament to raise taxes, and then also, with the power to raise taxes, support potential debt. And so that's why I'm unhappy, because I understand the political constraints and they need to, to deal with the situation as we have it. But what I really lack is this longer run vision for how we can make the Eurozone into a truly, in an economic system that really works, and that means all economists essentially agree. All the criticism when the euro was created from the United States essentially was about that. You can't just centralize monetary policy. There needs to be a centralization of some component of fiscal policy as well. If you don't centralize, then you will have those funny rules and countries doing essentially what they want, and reforms of the rules every 5 years or so. Is exactly what we have. So I think the answer would be a big push in completing the EMU. Now that is maybe naive, because the policymakers are not born to do that, maybe, or maybe my kids can do it, or you can do it, the young people here, and we will see on the 9th of June a backlash probably. It will not be a deepening of Europe. It will not go a step towards completing those European projects. But after every crisis, or after even night, there's a new morning, maybe. And I think for that morning, we need to be prepared and have the right ideas in place. No? And so I'm not happy about this, because it's one again incremental step, maybe in the right direction, but we are not even sure whether it's the right direction. And so I think we need to be bolder and more more aggressive in building the European project. And if we as citizens don't ask for it, it will not happen, because national governments are not extremely interested in that, except of course of the Bulgarian government when Atanas was there. Okay. So at this stage, let me thank you, Tim and Birgit and Cinzia and Atanas, and the Vice Rector for having us here in this nice hall. And of course, let me also thank you for being patient with us. We have taken 15 more minutes of your time. I think it was a good discussion, but of course it was much too short. I think every speaker here has mentioned how complicated this rule set is, what set of rules is, it is, right? And we will probably need a whole semester to get to the core of it, but we've done what we could in the 90 or 80 minutes that we have. So thank you for your patience and have a safe trip home again. Thank you.